Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. The Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones are an English rock band formed in London in 1962. The original lineup consisted of Brian Jones, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Bill Wyman, Charlie Watts, and Ian Stewart. Stewart was removed from the official lineup in 1963, but continued as a touring member until his death in 1985. Jones left the band less than a month prior to his death in 1969, having already been replaced by Mick Taylor, who remained until 1974. After Taylor left the band, Ronnie Wood took his place in 1975, and has been on guitar in tandem with Richards ever since. Following Wyman's departure in 1993, Darryl Jones joined as their touring bassist. Other touring keyboardists for the band have been Nicky Hopkins, Billy Preston and Chuck Leavell. The band was first led by Jones, but after teaming as the band's songwriters, Jagger and Richards assumed leadership while Jones dealt with legal and personal troubles. The Rolling Stones were at the forefront of the British invasion of bands that became popular in the US in 1964, and identified with the youthful and rebellious counterculture of the 1960s. Rooted in blues and early rock and roll, the group began a short period of musical experimentation in the mid-1960s that peaked with the psychedelic album Their Satanic Majesty's Request. Subsequently, the group returned to its bluesy roots with Beggar's Banquet, which along with its follow-ups Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street is generally considered to be the band's best work, and is seen as their golden age. During this period, they were first introduced on stage as the world's greatest rock and roll band. Musicologist Robert Palmer attributed the remarkable endurance of the Rolling Stones to being rooted in traditional verities, in rhythm and blues and soul music. While more ephemeral pop fashions have come and gone, the band continued to release commercially successful records in the 1970s and sold many albums, including Some Girls and Tattoo You, which were their most popular albums worldwide. From 1983 to 1987, tensions between Jagger and Richards almost caused the band to split. However, they managed to patch up their friendship in 1987. They separated temporarily to work on solo projects and experienced a comeback with Steel Wheels, which was followed by a large stadium and arena tour. Since the 1990s, new recorded material from the group has been less well received and less frequent. Despite this, the Rolling Stones have continued to be a huge attraction on the live circuit, with stadium tours in the 1990s and 2000s. By 2007, the band had 4 of the top 5 highest-grossing concert tours of all time: Voodoo Lounge Tour, Bridges to Babylon Tour, Licks Tour and A Bigger Bang Tour. The Rolling Stones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989, and the UK Music Hall of Fame in 2004. Rolling Stone magazine ranked them 4th on the 100 Greatest Artists of All Time list, and their estimated album sales are above 250 million. They have released 30 studio albums, 18 live albums and numerous compilations. Let It Bleed was their first of 5 consecutive #1 studio and live albums in the UK. Sticky Fingers was the first of 8 consecutive #1 studio albums in the US. In 2008, the band ranked 10th on the Billboard Hot 100 All-Time Top Artists chart. In 2012, the band celebrated its 50th anniversary. Early history. Keith Richards and Mick Jagger were childhood friends and classmates in Dartford, Kent, until the Jaggers moved to Wilmington. Jagger had formed a garage band with Dick Taylor, mainly playing Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Howlin' Wolf and Bo Diddley material. Jagger met Richards again in 1960 on Platform 2 of Dartford Railway Station. The Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters records that Jagger carried revealed a common interest that prompted their musical partnership. Richards joined Jagger and Taylor at frequent meetings at Jagger's house. The meetings switched to Taylor's house in late 1961, where the three were joined by Alan Etherington and Bob Beckwith. They called themselves the Blue Boys. In March 1962, the Blue Boys read about the Ealing Jazz Club in the Jazz News newspaper and visited the place on 7 April 1962. The band members met Brian Jones there, as he sat in playing slide guitar with Alexis Korner's seminal London rhythm and blues band, Blues Incorporated, the band that also had future Rolling Stones members Ian Stewart and Charlie Watts. Before visiting the Ealing Jazz Club, the Blue Boys had sent a tape of their best recordings to Alexis Korner, who was impressed. After a meeting with Korner, Jagger and Richards started jamming with Blues Incorporated. Brian Jones advertised for bandmates in the Jazz News, and Ian Stewart found a practice space and joined with Jones to start a rhythm and blues band playing Chicago blues. Shortly thereafter, Jagger, Taylor and Richards left Blues Incorporated to join Jones and Stewart in their effort. Also, at the first rehearsal were guitarist Jeff Bradford and vocalist Brian Knight, both of whom declined to join the band, citing objections to playing the Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley songs preferred by Jagger and Richards. In June 1962 the lineup was as follows: Jagger, Jones, Richards, Stewart, Taylor, and drummer Tony Chapman. According to Richards, Jones christened the band during a phone call to Jazz News. When asked for a band name, Jones saw a Muddy Waters LP lying on the floor. One of the OLP's tracks was Rollin' Stone. 1962 to 1964, building a following. Jagger, Richards and Jones with Stewart and Dick Taylor on bass played the gig billed as the Rollin' Stones on 12 July 1962 at the Marquee Club, 165 Oxford Street, London. Their material included the Chicago blues as well as Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley songs. Bassist Bill Wyman joined in December 1962 and drummer Charlie Watts the following January 1963 to form the band's original rhythm section. The Rolling Stones' then acting manager Giorgio Gomelski secured a Sunday afternoon residency at the Crawdaddy Club in Richmond, which, Gomelski said, triggered an international renaissance for the blues and was a seminal facet of swinging London's advent. The Rolling Stones signed manager Andrew Loog Oldham, a publicist who was directed to the band by previous clients, the Beatles. Because Oldham had not reached majority, he was 19 and younger than any member of the band, he could not get an agent's license nor sign any contracts without his mother also signing. By necessity he joined with booking agent Eric Easton. Gomelski had no written agreement with the band and was not consulted. Initially Oldham tried to apply the Epstein strategy of making the band members wear suits. Later, he changed his strategy. He imagined a band which contrasted with the neat, smiling Beatles image. Oldham stated, "The overall hustle I invented for the Stones was to establish them as a raunchy, gamey, unpredictable bunch of undesirables. I decided that, since the Beatles had already usurped the clean-cut choir boy image with synchronized jackets, I should take the Stones down the opposite road. Rejecting matching clothing was one step. Emphasizing the long hair and unclean appearance was another, and indicating the press to write about them, using catchy phrases that I had coined was yet another. I wanted to establish that the Stones were threatening, uncouth and animalistic. Consequently, Ian Stewart left the official lineup, but stayed as road manager and touring keyboardist. Oldham explained Stewart's decision: "Well, he just doesn't look the part, and 6 is too many for fans to remember the faces in the picture." Later, Oldham cut a few years off the ages of the band members to make them appear as teens. Decca Records, which had passed on signing the Beatles, gave the Rolling Stones a recording contract with very favorable terms. The band got 3 times a new act's typical royalty rate, full artistic control of recordings, and ownership of the recording masters. The deal also let the band use non-Decca recording studios, Regent Sound Studios, a mono facility equipped with egg boxes on the ceiling for sound treatment, became the preferred facility. Oldham, who had no recording experience, but made himself the band's producer, said Regent had a sound that leaked instrument to instrument the right way, creating a wall of noise that worked well for the band. Due to Regent's low rates, the band could record for extended periods rather than the usual 3-hour blocks then prevalent at other studios. All tracks on the first Rolling Stones UK album were recorded at Regent. Oldham contrasted the Rolling Stones' independence with the Beatles' obligation to record in Emma's studios, saying it made them appear as mere mortals, sweating in the studio. For the Man, Oldham promoted the Rolling Stones as the nasty counterpoints to the Beatles by having the band pose unsmiling on the cover of their first UK album. He also encouraged the press to use provocative headlines such as, "Would you let your daughter marry a Rolling Stone?" Though Oldham initially had dressed the band in uniform suits, the band drifted back to wearing everyday clothes for public appearances. According to Wyman, "Our reputation and image as the bad boys came later, completely there, accidentally. Andrew never did engineer it. He simply exploited it exhaustively. We were the first pop group to break away from the whole Cliff Richard thing where the bands did little dance steps, wore identical uniforms and had snappy patter." Bill Wyman, a cover of Chuck Berry's "Come On" was the Rolling Stones' first single, released on the 7th of June 1963. The band refused to play it at live gigs, and Decca bought only one ad to promote the single. With Oldham's direction, fan club members bought copies at record shops polled by the charts, helping "Come On" rise to number 21 on the UK singles charts. Having a charting single gave the band entrée to play outside London, starting with a booking at the Outlet Club in Middlesbrough on the 13th of July, sharing the billing with the Hollies. Bill Wyman's book Rolling with the Stones incorrectly states the band played the Alcove Club that night. Later in the year, Oldham and Easton arranged the band's first big UK concert tour as a supporting act for American stars including Bo Diddley, Little Richard, and the Everly Brothers. This autumn 1963 tour became a training ground for the young band's stagecraft. During this tour, the Rolling Stones recorded their second single, a Lennon-McCartney penned number entitled "I Wanna Be Your Man." It reached number 12 in the UK charts. Their third single, Buddy Holly's "Not Fade Away," itself based on Bo Diddley's style, was released in February 1964 and reached number 3. Oldham saw little future for an act that lost significant songwriting royalties by playing songs of middle-aged blacks, limiting the appeal to teenage audiences. Jagger and Richards decided to write songs together, the first batch of which Oldham described as soppy and imitative, because songwriting developed slowly. Songs on the band's first album, The Rolling Stones, were primarily covers, with only one Jagger-Richards original, Tell Me, and 2 numbers credited to Nanka Felsch, the pen name for songs written by the entire group. The Rolling Stones' first U.S. tour in June 1964 was, in Bill Wyman's words, a disaster. When we arrived, we didn't have a hit record there, or anything going for us. When the band appeared on the variety show The Hollywood Palace, that week's guest host Dean Martin mocked both the hair and the performance. During the tour they recorded for 2 days at Chess Studios in Chicago, meeting many of their most important influences, including Muddy Waters. These sessions included what would become the Rolling Stones' first #1 hit in the UK, their cover of Bobby and Shirley Womack's It's All Over Now. The Stones followed James Brown and the Famous Flames in the filmed theatrical release of The Tommy Show, which showcased American acts with British invasion artists. According to Jagger in 2003, "We weren't actually following James Brown, because there was considerable time between the filming of each section. Nevertheless, he was still very annoyed about it." On the 25th of October, the band also appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. Because of the initial pandemonium the Rolling Stones caused, Sullivan banned the band from his show, though he booked for subsequent appearances in the years following. Their second LP, the US-only 12x5, was released during this tour. The Rolling Stones' 5th UK single, a cover of Willie Dixon's Little Red Rooster, backed by Off the Hook, credited to Nanka Felsch, was released in November 1964. And became their second #1 hit in the UK, an unprecedented achievement for a blues number. The band's US distributors declined to release Little Red Rooster as a single. In December 1964, London Records released the band's first single, with Jagger-Richards originals on both sides, Heart of Stone, backed with What a Shame. Heart of Stone went to number 19 in the US. 1965 to 1967, Height of Fame. The band's second UK LP, The Rolling Stones #2, released in January 1965, charted at #1 as an album, and the US version, released in February as The Rolling Stones Now, reached #5. The album was recorded at Chess Studios in Chicago and RCA Studios in Los Angeles. In January-February 1965, the band played 34 shows for about 100,000 people in Australia and New Zealand. The first Jagger-Richards composition to reach #1 on the UK singles charts was The Last Time. It went to #9 in the US. It was also later identified by Richards as the bridge into thinking about writing for the Stones. It gave us a level of confidence, a pathway of how to do it. Their first international #1 hit was Satisfaction, recorded in May 1965. During the band's third North American tour. In recording the guitar riff with the fuzzbox that drives the song, Richards had envisioned it as a scratch track to guide a horn section. In spite of this, the final cut was without the planned horn overdubs. Issued in the summer of 1965, it was their 4th UK #1 and first US #1, where it spent 4 weeks at the top of the Billboard Hot 100, establishing the Rolling Stones as a worldwide premiere act. The US version of the LP Out of Our Heads also went to #1. It included 7 original songs. Their second international #1 single, Get Off of My Cloud, was released in the autumn of 1965, followed by another US-only LP, December's Children. Aftermath, released in the late spring of 1966, was the first Rolling Stones album to be composed entirely of Jagger, Richards songs. On this album, Jones' contributions expanded beyond guitar and harmonica. To the Middle Eastern-influenced Paint It Black, he added sitar. To the ballad Lady Jane, he added dulcimers, and to Under My Thumb, he added marimbas. Aftermath was also notable for the almost 12-minute long Goin' Home. The Stones' success on the British and American singles charts peaked during 1966. 19th Nervous Breakdown was followed by their transatlantic #1 hit, Paint It Black. Mother's Little Helper reached number 8 in the US. It was one of the first pop songs to address the issue of prescription drug abuse. The September 1966 single, Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby? Standing in the Shadows, was notable in several respects. It was the first Stones recording to feature brass horns. The back cover photo on the original US picture sleeve depicted the group satirically dressed in drag, and the song was accompanied by one of the first official music videos, directed by Peter Whitehead. January 1967 saw the release of Between the Buttons. The album was Andrew Oldham's last venture as the Rolling Stones producer. The US version included the double A-side single, Let's Spend the Night Together, and Ruby Tuesday, which went to #1 in the US and #3 in the UK. When the band went to New York to perform the numbers on The Ed Sullivan Show, they were ordered to change the lyrics of the refrain to, Let's Spend Some Time Together. In early 1967, Jagger, Richards and Jones began to be hounded by authorities over their recreational drug use. After News of the World ran a 3-part feature entitled, Pop Stars and Drugs, Facts That Will Shock You. The series described alleged LSD parties hosted by the Moody Blues and attended by top stars including The Who's Pete Townsend and Cream's Ginger Baker, and alleged admissions of drug use by leading pop musicians. The first article targeted Donovan, the second installment targeted the Rolling Stones. A reporter who contributed to the story spent an evening at the exclusive London club Blazes, where a member of the Rolling Stones allegedly took several Benzedrine tablets, displayed a piece of hashish, and invited his companions back to his flat for a smoke. The article claimed that this was Mick Jagger, but it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. The reporter had in fact been eavesdropping on Brian Jones. On the night the article was published, Jagger appeared on the Eamon Andrews chat show and announced that he was filing a writ for libel against the paper. A week later, on the 12th of February, Sussex police, tipped off by the News of the World, who in turn were tipped off by Richards' chauffeur, raided a party at Keith Richards' home, Redlands. No arrests were made at the time, but Jagger, Richards, and their friend art dealer Robert Fraser were subsequently charged with drug offenses. Richards said in 2003, when we got busted at Redlands, it suddenly made us realize that this was a whole different ballgame, and that was when the fun stopped. Up until then it had been as though London existed in a beautiful space where you could do anything you wanted. On the treatment of the man responsible for the raid, he later added, as I heard it, he never walked the same again. In March 1967, while awaiting the consequences of the police raid, Jagger, Richards and Jones took a short trip to Morocco, accompanied by Marianne Faithfull, Jones' girlfriend Anita Pallenberg, and other friends. During this trip, the stormy relations between Jones and Pallenberg deteriorated, to the point that Pallenberg left Morocco with Richards. Richards said later, that was the final nail in the coffin with me and Brian. He'd never forgive me for that and I don't blame him, but hell, shit happens. Richards and Pallenberg would remain a couple for 12 years. Despite these complications, the Rolling Stones toured Europe in March and April 1967. The tour included the band's first performances in Poland, Greece, and Italy. On the 10th of May 1967, the same day Jagger, Richards and Fraser were arraigned in connection with the Redlands charges. Brian Jones' house was raided by police and he was arrested and charged with possession of cannabis. 3 out of 5 Rolling Stones now faced drug charges. Jagger and Richards were tried at the end of June. On the 29th of June, Jagger was sentenced to 3 months imprisonment for possession of 4 amphetamine tablets. Richards was found guilty of allowing cannabis to be smoked on his property and sentenced to 1 year in prison. Both Jagger and Richards were imprisoned at that point, but were released on bail the next day pending appeal. The Times ran the famous editorial entitled, "Who Breaks a Butterfly on a Wheel?", in which conservative editor William Rees-Mogg surprised his readers by his unusually critical discourse on the sentencing, pointing out that Jagger had been treated far more harshly for a minor first offense than any purely anonymous young man. While awaiting the appeal hearings, the band recorded a new single, "We Love You," as a thank you for the loyalty shown by their fans. It began with the sound of prison doors closing, and the accompanying music video included allusions to the trial of Oscar Wilde. On the 31st of July, the appeals court overturned Richards' conviction, and Jagger's sentence was reduced to a conditional discharge. Brian Jones' trial took place in November 1967. In December, after appealing the original prison sentence, Jones was fined £1,000, put on 3 years probation, and ordered to seek professional help. December 1967 also saw the release of their Satanic Majesty's Request, which received unfavorable reviews, and was widely regarded as a poor imitation of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Satanic Majesties had been recorded in difficult circumstances while Jagger, Richards, and Jones were dealing with their court cases. The band parted ways with producer Andrew Oldham during the sessions. The split was amicable, at least publicly. But in 2003 Jagger said, "The reason Andrew left was because he thought that we weren't concentrating and that we were being childish. It was not a great moment really, and I would have thought it wasn't a great moment for Andrew either. There were a lot of distractions and you always need someone to focus you. At that point, that was Andrew's job." Satanic Majesties thus became the first album the Rolling Stones produced on their own. Its psychedelic sound was complemented by the cover art, which featured a 3D photo by Michael Cooper, who had also photographed the cover of Sgt. Pepper. Bill Wyman wrote and sang a track on the album, "In Another Land," which was also released as a single, the first on which Jagger did not sing lead. 1968 to 1972, Golden Age. The band spent the first few months of 1968 working on material for their next album. Those sessions resulted in the song, "Jumpin' Jack Flash," released as a single in May. The song and the subsequent album, "Beggar's Banquet," an eclectic mix of country and blues-inspired tunes, marked the band's return to their roots, and the beginning of their collaboration with producer Jimmy Miller. It featured the lead single, "Street Fighting Man," and "Sympathy for the Devil." "Beggar's Banquet" was well received at the time of release. Richards said, "There is a change between material on Satanic Majesties and Beggar's Banquet. I'd grown sick to death of the whole Maharishi Guru shit and the beads and bells. Who knows? where these things come from, but I guess the music was a reaction to what we'd done in our time off, and also that severe dose of reality. A spell in prison will certainly give you room for thought. I was fucking pissed with being busted. So it was, right, we'll go and strip this thing down. There's a lot of anger in the music. From the period, Richards started using open tunings for rhythm parts, most prominently an open E or open D tuning in 1968. Beginning in 1969, he often used 5-string open G tuning, as heard on the 1969 single, Honky Tonk Women, Brown Sugar, Tumbling Dice, Happy, and Start Me Up. The end of 1968 saw the filming of the Rolling Stones' Rock and Roll Circus. It featured John Lennon, Yoko Ono, The Dirty Mac, The Who, Jethro Tull, Marianne Faithfull, and Taj Mahal. The footage was shelved for 28 years, but was finally released officially in 1996, with a DVD version released in October 2004. By the release of Beggar's Banquet, Brian Jones was increasingly troubled, and was only sporadically contributing to the band. Jagger said that Jones was not psychologically suited to this way of life. His drug use had become a hindrance, and he was unable to obtain the U.S. visa. Richards reported that, in a June meeting with Jagger, Richards, and Watts at Jones' house, Jones admitted that he was unable to go on the road again, and left the band, saying, "I've left, and if I want to I can come back." On the 3rd of July 1969, less than a month later, Jones drowned in the swimming pool under mysterious circumstances at his home, Cotchford Farm, in Hartfield, East Sussex. The Rolling Stones were scheduled to play at a free concert for Black Hill Enterprises in London's Hyde Park. 2 days after Brian Jones' death, they decided to proceed with the show as a tribute to Jones. The concert, their first with new guitarist Mick Taylor, was performed in front of an estimated 250,000 fans. The performance was filmed by a Granada television production team, and was shown on British television as the Stones in the Park. Jagger read an excerpt from Shelley's poem Adonais, an elegy written on the death of his friend John Keats, and they released thousands of butterflies in memory of Jones before opening their set with "I'm Yours and I'm Hers," a Johnny Winter number, also performed, but previously unheard, by the audience, were "Midnight Rambler" and "Love in Vain," from their forthcoming album Let It Bleed, and "Give Me a Drink," which eventually appeared on Exile on Main Street. The show also included the concert debut of "Honky Tonk Women," which the band had just released the previous day. The Black Hill Enterprises stage manager Sam Cutler introduced them as the greatest rock and roll band in the world, a description he repeated throughout their 1969 US tour, and which has stuck to this day. The release of Let It Bleed came in December, their last album of the 60s. Let It Bleed featured Gimme Shelter, the lead female vocalist, and famed solo on Gimme Shelter is performed by singer Mary Clayton. Other tracks include You Can't Always Get What You Want, Midnight Rambler, as well as a cover of Robert Johnson's Love in Vain. Jones and Taylor are featured on 2 tracks each. Just after the tour, the band performed at the Ultimate Free concert at the Ultimate Speedway, about 50 miles east of San Francisco. The biker gang Hells Angels provided security, and a fan, Meredith Hunter, was stabbed and beaten to death by the Angels after they realized that he was armed. Part of the tour and the Ultimate concert were documented in Albert and David Maysler's film Gimme Shelter. As a response to the growing popularity of bootleg recordings, the album Get Ya Ya Yes Out was released in 1970. It was declared by critic Lester Bangs to be the best live album ever.
At the end of the decade, the band appeared on the BBC's highly rated review of the 60s music scene Pop Go the 60s, performing "Gimme Shelter" on the show, which was broadcast live on the 31st of December 1969. In 1970, the band's contracts with both Alan Klein and Decca Records ended, and amid contractual disputes with Klein, they formed their own record company, Rolling Stones Records. Sticky Fingers, released in March 1971, the band's first album on their own label, featured an elaborate cover design by Andy Warhol. The Stones' Decca catalog is currently owned by Klein's ABKCO label. Sticky Fingers was the first to feature the logo of Rolling Stones Records, which effectively became the band's logo. It consisted of a pair of lips with their lapping tongue. Designer John Parcher created the logo following a suggestion by Jagger to copy the outstuck tongue of the Hindu goddess Kali. Critic Sean Egan has said of the logo, "Without using the Stones' name, it instantly conjures them, or at least Jagger, as well as a certain lasciviousness that is the Stones' own." It quickly and deservedly became the most famous logo in the history of popular music. The tongue and lips design was a part of a package that, in 2003, VH1 named the number 1 greatest album cover of all time. The album contains one of their best-known hits, Brown Sugar, and the country-influenced Dead Flowers. Both were recorded at Alabama's Muscle Shoals Sound Studio during the 1969 American tour. The album continued the band's immersion into heavily blues-influenced compositions. The album is noted for its loose, ramshackle ambience and marked Mick Taylor's first full release with the band. Following the release of Sticky Fingers, the Rolling Stones left England after receiving financial advice. They moved to the south of France, where Richards rented the Villa Nelkit and sublet rooms to band members and entourage. Using the Rolling Stones mobile studio, they held recording sessions in the basement. They completed the resulting tracks, along with material dating as far back as 1969, at Sunset Studios in Los Angeles. The resulting double album, Exile on Main Street, was released in May 1972. Given an A+ grade by critic Robert Christgau and disparaged by Lester Bangs, who reversed his opinion within months, Exile is now accepted as one of the Stones' best albums. The films Cocksucker Blues and Ladies and Gentlemen, The Rolling Stones documents the subsequent highly publicized 1972 North American tour. The band's double compilation, Hot Rocks 1964–1971, was released in 1972. The compilation is certified diamond in the US, having sold over 12 million copies, and has spent over 264 weeks on the Billboard album chart. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.